Welcome back to the Pleb Underground. We're going to be talking a very contentious topic, MSTR and their Bitcoin holdings. Can this last? I've got a very special guest joining me to discuss this. He's a professor, a researcher, consultant, and the co-founder and COO of 21st Capital. But before I bring him on, got to give some love to the Pleb Underground sponsors. Then after that, we're going to dive into this very spicy conversation. Stay with us. Pleb Underground is brought to you by NOHhue. Go check them out at NOHhue.com. They are building the Amazon for Bitcoiners, a one-stop shop for Bitcoin-only brands. New brands are going to be added every month, so go check them out. Don't miss what's happening at NOHhue.com. Pleb Underground is brought to you by CypherSafe. You guys all know I am a pet rock enjoyer. Love the swag, love the collectibles. This is the ultimate Bitcoin collectible. That's right, guys. We're talking 16 ounces of solid titanium, the Bitcoin Rolo Triangle. Go check it out at cyphersafe.io. Sina, thank you very much for joining me on the Pleb Underground, man. I think the last time that we spoke was probably close to 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of a podcast. So I really appreciate you coming on the show. This is awesome.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm excited to be here. That time, I think we were doing this, the article together, and then we discussed some of your thoughts about Bitcoin culture. But I've been following your work for more than half a decade, I think, at this point. So,
oh man, I'm truly
regardless
humbled.
of how infrequent we do shows together, I'm always virtually in touch and close.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. And I love your work with 21st Capital. I love the research that you're doing. And we're going to, I think before we get into the really heavy MSTR stuff, let's let the viewers, who is Sina, right? What is 21st Capital? Let's dive into that first before we talk about the MSTR stuff that's going to make everybody hate us.
Yeah.
Trying to warm them up
okay,
first.
so-
I actually kind of like this guy before he tells me things I hate,
Yeah, I mean, my day job is I'm a professor in business. I've been trained to basically answer interesting business questions. What we do a lot is we collect a bunch of data from an interesting business problem. If this policy is helpful or not, and then we try to answer it using logic and data and everything. So I've been trained at this for 14 years at the university level, so pretty deep into data analytics and everything that comes around it, econometrics, machine learning, whatever you name it. And the research aspect, actually, that's what got me into Bitcoin. I was looking at Bitcoin's applications in business in like 2015. I think last time we also talked about this story, which didn't really end up being super fruitful, but it got me started in Bitcoin. So that's how I approach it. And my job is basically gives me pretty much full freedom to research whatever that I find interesting, and I want to channel a lot of that energy back into Bitcoin. So back in 2020, we started our first serious work in Bitcoin, which was a purely educational platform. We were just simply creating long form courses on different topics related to Bitcoin. It was called BitGuide. Right now, rebranded as part of 21st Capital. But basically, I was doing a lot of economics and monetary history and the concept of money courses. My co-founder was doing technical courses, and we started from there. And then I started my own Telegram community. We've been educating the Persian community for years there now, giving them the signal. And I think all of that started when I got really frustrated by the amount of nonsense that you can find when you search for Google. Especially, we have something like, is it like 500,000? Is it 2 million other altcoin projects that are incentivized to put nonsense on the internet? So a lot of noobs would just get super confused, and no one was giving proper vetted information about Bitcoin. So that's why we started that. And to cut it short, a while later, we realized, especially I think after all this talk about ETFs and all the other, centralized entities that were accumulating Bitcoin, we felt there is a need for making self custody easier. And around the same time, we figured out the mini script technology, which was activated with Taproot, but still people had not developed good tools around it. Then Liana comes around, and they actually implement mini script, which allows you to have this superpower where you have a multi-sig setup as a backup to another multi-sig setup. So this has the advantage of you can have all the control over your multi-sig, but if you screw up, which is the number one fear people have, you can still have backups, and that backup could be still yours, maybe controlled by someone else, and then there could be even another backup. That one you can give it to some professional service like us, for instance. So we essentially are unable to touch anything unless you screw up and lose 2 layers of keys, and then we can rescue you after your time locks expire, and so on. So basically, we discovered that this solution can enable Bitcoiners to adopt much more complex security without fear. Especially in some of the user studies we did, people were like, I definitely want to move it out of the exchanges, or the ones that do single sig, I definitely want to upgrade it to multi-sig, but the number one fear I have is myself. So we are basically offering that subset of the users the ability to have some backup, to at least make their coins not losable, if that's even a word. So you can't lose it when you have multiple layers of backup. However, you could still get robbed, right? And for that, a really good multi-sig setup should still be good enough. So essentially, what we're trying to solve is the user error that leads to lost Bitcoin.
That's very nice. All right, sorry about the technical difficulties there. Anyways, yeah, like I said, new connection, and hopefully this kind of stuff sorts itself out, or maybe I just need new hardware. I'm not really sure. So Sina, something I noticed. How would you characterize though your because I am a member of your Telegram chat for 21 Capital. I look at pretty much almost all the reports that you put out. You're probably, I would say, one of my main go-to sources for actual Bitcoin information that or Bitcoin related information that isn't just puffery. But how would you characterize your reporting? Or how would you characterize 21st Capital, I should say?
I mean, we are very dedicated to this idea of applying brutal logic. So if we look at some data, and if we look at the analysis, and it makes us more cautious than bullish, we're just gonna say it. But we're not dumb. I mean, we exactly know that if you simply go with the hype bullish narrative, it gets better received, and you get much more shout outs and everything. But we essentially don't care. We are brutally optimizing for value, and then we'll just hope the right people will find it, and will benefit from it. And perhaps we don't even need more engagement than that. Generally, I would like to characterize 21st Capital as this two-arm company at this point. We have this self-enhanced, enhanced collaborative custody solution that is the antithesis to the lazy way of holding Bitcoin in ETFs or exchanges. Then we've also expanded recently to what is my bread and butter, which is analytics. And which is, we just launched it last week. It's called Bitcoin Intelligence. It is now basically us, instead of posting things on Twitter, writing full coherent articles with all the data and charts and analyzing everything. So, I have a quite strong background in economics. So I write a lot more of the macro part of that research. and I work with some people from existing on-chain analytics institutions that help me figure out what's going on chain. And then we also use some of our own tools and techniques, econometrics models that we have developed to better understand what's going on. And the goal is basically to figure out what's happening in this complex market. You know, Bitcoin is very complex, very volatile, right? At times we have euphoria. It would be very helpful for us to know what euphoria is. You and I probably at this point don't even need the data. We can just feel it when people are just going crazy and everybody's like giving this 100x higher price targets and everything. But it's also nice to be able to, you know, measure the euphoria. I in the past I've just gone by feel, and it has always worked. So unlike Saylor, I've never bought at the top, but so I do a DCA. But also when I hear all these, you know, crazy price targets, I actually take a step back. I'm like, I don't want to participate in this market at this point. But and there are other times when price tanks from, you know, 68 to 15 and you're genuinely worried. I mean, it's like it's human to be a little bit worried, but still,
Right?
again, in that scenario, you can look at the data and you could see how terrible the sentiment is and how bullish that is actually. Then that gives you better strength in holding and doing whatever you were doing. So I don't know, maybe it's just my own story, but having the ability to look at the data gave me just a little bit more confidence when I was accumulating super heavily at those bottoms. And I've been buying the whole leg down, the whole leg up, except those, you know, super euphoric tops. But even if it's at the emotional level where I don't feel bad, you know, and I feel like I'm actually I'm not crazy, I'm not destroying I'm not destroying my savings and everything just by looking at the data and getting a better, you know, higher confidence in my long-term vision. That's what we're trying to do and give people, you know. Again, at this point, again, you and I probably don't care. Bitcoin can drop to $5 and we'll keep buying, right? We don't care.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I constantly think about it. Like if it drops to $1, fantastic. Fantastic. I actually like it, you know? So,
The problem is this, right? And this is what I think people like you and I know, is that it never gets to that dollar, right? Because there's way too much. Think of it like we would buy it at $100. I would buy it just as hard at $100 as I would at $1, as $1,000 as $5,000. So as 10. So it's, yeah, that's, I mean,
yeah, it's
yeah,
basically
we
like,
just don't see that. And on top of that, don't forget Adam. Adam has wait, what's his bid? No, not at $1 or $2. I think his bid is at 2 cents, right? To buy all the
oh,
Bitcoin.
I'm
It
not
never
aware
goes
of
to
that. There
zero.
is,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. He has an open bid, I think, for all the Bitcoin at 2 cents. So it'll never go to
Exactly.
zero.
I mean, there is enough of us that we are basically the hodlers of last resort. Like whatever
That's
happens,
right.
there is this zealous community that will never ever sell, and they'll actually buy when it drops. So that actually, you know, this was one of the things that gave me conviction back in the day when I was
Hmm.
deciding to like move 100% of my net worth into this. I was like, I like these people. Like these are my guys. Like these are the base. These are the foundation. Everything else on top is kind of like can come and go. But this community, this foundation of lovers, basically, is it gives you a lot of a lot of conviction. So yeah, but you do find a lot of people who are a little bit newer to the space and they get confused here and there. So mostly, I think for them, it's very helpful to have a better understanding of what's going on, because especially when you know you don't know. I mean, you're hearing a lot of information that are bullish, you're hearing a lot of information that are bearish, and they all come at the worst time. At the top, you get like 99% bullish content. At the bottom, you get a million bearish, it's over content, right?
We're going to
So
zero.
basically what we're trying to do in our Bitcoin intelligence work is give people some more clarity about what's going on, especially something that's a little bit deeper than just, hey, I found some chart on Twitter and I feel this way about it. So we look at the big picture, the macroeconomics, and then try to link movement of money in different markets and see how the sentiment is in derivatives, the sentiment is in on-chain, and so on. So we've just started that. Let's see how that goes. And depending on the interest, we'll just make it deeper and spend more time on it. But very, very new, and I hope guys find it useful.
Well, I'm definitely going to be looking out for for everything that you're going to be dropping. So I really appreciate your research.
Show me your mug.
Sorry, yeah, that's right. The Ember mug, right? For the people who don't know, you know what? Sometimes Bitcoiners do like to spend money. Mine was a gift. I think yours was a gift too, wasn't it?
It was.
So both of us, it was gifts from the wife, and honestly, not gonna lie, it is the best mug that I've ever used. I never thought I'd actually like something this much. It's kind of sad. Not gonna lie, it's kind of sad. But it's okay. What are you gonna say?
Competition.
Right?
Yeah.
I wonder who else is someone else is gonna make one. Okay. Speaking of competition, let's we're gonna move switch the gears over to MSTR, right? Because apparently, as we've been seeing on the Twitters or the X, whatever you want to call it, it's like a bit of a storm brewing, right? It's interesting. So now we've got this added layer of noise. We've got a lot of TradFi people that have come to the Bitcoin space as MSTR cheerleaders, and essentially as Bitcoiners, to a certain extent, some of us are getting clowned, right? I saw, I forget, I think it was Pirate Beach Bum who put a thread out a couple of days ago, and like one of these MSTR guys wrote back and was like, "Do the math." So we're getting clowned the way we were clowning,
Yeah, it's like 5-6 years ago, repeating in reverse. It's so funny. It's so
do
funny.
The math. Okay, so let's so for the people who don't know, right, MicroStrategy is if you've been under a rock, right, MicroStrategy is a publicly traded company. The CEO was Michael Saylor. I don't actually know that he's even CEO anymore, but it doesn't make a difference because he is the social face of that company. So I think that's almost even irrelevant. But anyways, he's been buying Bitcoin since 2020, if I'm not mistaken. At this point, Strategy claims to have approximately 500,000 Bitcoin, I believe. I think so. I'll go back and take a look. I know that one of the last numbers I heard a few weeks ago was like 420,000 something Bitcoin. So I'm pretty sure he's higher than that now.
Yeah, 500,000.
Okay, there you go, or like 513, who knows? Either way. So as most of us know, that company is a business intelligence software company. That's what they claim to do. That's the service and/or product that they claim to sell. But most recently, they have begun to essentially monetize their business. I should say, monetize their Bitcoin holdings through share sales of various types, right? They've got the dividend yield on the very small number of preferred shares, and then on top of that, they've got a new investment dividend paying vehicle called Strike as well, which is a completely different share. It's a completely different ticker. It's not MSTR. It's not MicroStrategy. It's STRK. Now, okay, so that's just like kind of like the general overview. So there's a lot of people that seem to believe that he or Strategy is going to somehow in some cases be more valuable then its underlying asset that it's accumulating is somehow going to be more valuable than Bitcoin. But also the thing that frightens me a little bit is that I'm seeing people believe that it's a sure thing, and he can just do this forever. So with that big general overview, let's dive into it, because I do also want to talk about MicroStrategy without its Bitcoin holdings, because I think that is kind of the crux of the matter. Anyways, Sina, I will let you dive into it.
We have been defending Saylor. I have tweets from 2020, 2021 that we've been defending Saylor against FUD. He's going to get imminently liquidated. And we respect him as someone who believes in Bitcoin and is willing to put in perhaps a lot of personal capital and a lot of corporate capital, and has been educating the TradFi world. That's been fantastic. Prosy is a very talented, smart man, and I love to listen to some of his characterizations of Bitcoin. He's really good with driving narratives and so on. However, that is a little bit different than fully selling out and becoming someone's army. Essentially, the way I see this is we've been pioneers. When we were in Bitcoin, we were up against the state. You would typically buy Bitcoin because it's censorship resistant money. It's FU to the state, it's FU to the central banks, and it allows you to have an asset outside the system. If people like that weren't holding strong and we're not defending Bitcoin so zealously, we wouldn't be here where it's now turning into a government asset. And now, like, investing in Bitcoin is extremely de-risked, and this is what allows corporates like MSTR and other ones accumulate it easily, because now the state, the government, the regulatory risk is removed. Okay, so we've been the pioneers. Why would I turn myself into I'm not trying to use the bad word, an army, a pawn in someone else's game? So I have a little bit of a concern with the new crop of the stock investors that essentially look to Saylor as a god, or a savior, or the champion. I'm like, the champion is every one of us. We've been front running
and stacking. That's right.
TradFi. We've been front running Saylor. We've been front running all the governments, and there's no reason to kind of think outsource your decision making and your thinking and your logic to Saylor. Right now, what I'm seeing is on social media, whatever he does is interpreted as some genius move. And I think he himself is a little bit amazed at this point. So I think people are taking that too far, but I really understand what happens, when you invest in something, especially as a newer person to this whole investing world and all that. And remember, we've also trained a whole generation of investors with this Robinhood and GameStop and all dynamics like that to love the hype and narrative. So when these people join and the stock price moves up, your initial beliefs get reinforced.
That's right. Your bias is confirmed.
Exactly. And now you're like, okay, there's nothing wrong with this. It's 100%, secure and safe. And then you're also extremely emotional that you're incapable of understanding any balanced take or concerns or anything that's kind of disconfirms some of your beliefs. So if Saylor does something that's like objectively dumb, just theoretically, you still can't talk about it on Twitter without making all the MicroStrategy army angry. And that doesn't make sense. If you're a smart investor, you have to be ready to see both sides. Okay. So that's some general thoughts. I think it's a very low T move to cheer for any single company, any single billionaire, any single government entity any single politician to buy more Bitcoin to, to pump your bags. First of all, they have to do it.
Yeah.
They don't have a choice. This is a natural progression of Bitcoin. They're not saving you, they're saving themselves.
Exactly.
So, and this is bound to happen. They're not
Mm.
saving you, and you don't have to cheer for them, right? So find more power in yourself, I would say, and rely more on yourself, because you were the one who persevered when none of the positive tailwinds was there. So we actually had much more profound foresight than these newcomers that can come in. And in fact, we bought it with our hard-earned dollars. They're buying it with cheap money that they can find just because the fiat system is so messed up, right? So that's another thing I see. If somebody borrowed a lot of cheap money and bought all the houses where I am, actually, that's happening. A bunch of Wall Street investors came during the COVID time. They benefited from the famous Cantillon effect, which means you get cheaper money when you're better connected with the central bank. They got lots of cheap money. They bought a lot of the houses, and now house prices are up. Normal people can't afford. Now all people who would have purchased are now renters, and all the benefit. And basically, these Wall Street guys are getting free money, because the houses are definitely going to go up further than the 1.5% mortgages that these guys have been able to get. Okay. So we've looked at these companies as leeches, as kind of like parasites
That exactly
exist just because the fiat system is so corrupt. So why would I still cheer and a similar process happening, which only ends up, and the only difference is that it's now pumping my back. So I don't need it, right? If you just give Bitcoin time, it does its wonders, and everyone else will realize that this is the future. And essentially, there's no the game theoretically, it's in everyone's best interest to adopt it. So there's nothing like to be super crazy about here. Now, specifically into details of the MicroStrategy. Yeah, so they initially began with the stock sale. Maybe I should go back. Actually, they have this software business, as you mentioned. Software business, in Saylor's terms, is and was a zombie. Really not doing well. I haven't seen anyone that really recommends their program. It was probably alive by some long-term government contracts. I haven't looked into like specific customers, but what I've heard here and there is that it wasn't really growing. And recent data that I have looked at also shows that in the most profitable time for software companies, post-COVID, massive stimulus, and everything, the revenues are not really growing, stagnant. So that shows me the software business is not doing much. And Saylor, being a super smart man, said this was the reason he came into Bitcoin. And basically, he realized that he has either fast death or slow death, and he has to find something else. He was very smart to make the pivot and save his company by buying Bitcoin instead. The math is very simple, right? If your actual operations is not returning anything remote to Bitcoin returns, well, you better stop operating and just buy your Bitcoin. So that was great. They used the proceeds from selling shares, the common stock, to buy more Bitcoin. That's nice. Then they figured out they could do some more financial engineering. They came up with this convertible notes that are very cheap, pretty close to 0%. But the benefit is it's kind of it has the convertibility features. A couple of years later, you have the option of converting that that note into shares. In other words, it's basically a call option. So you give some money to MicroStrategy,
Mhm.
and they bought Bitcoin. Several years later, you have the option to buy the stock. Hopefully, that Bitcoin has grown so much, so you're in a lot of profit. And the convertible note buyers are very happy. They've been super well performing, and it's also great for MicroStrategy. Low percentage, um, uh, cheap debt. However,
Mhm.
another thing that a lot of people don't want to really think about is once these convert, new shares will be issued. So the existing shareholders would have to get diluted to pay those gains to the note holders. So that's one thing. This year we've had two interesting ideas: a strike and strife. The strike is
Yes.
senior to convertible notes in the capital structure in case of bankruptcy, and the strife is even higher. Um, so let's start with strife, which is much simpler to understand. It
Mm.
gives you a yield. It's simply a bond, right? It's a preferred stock without the callability option. So the company can't cancel it, and you get a fixed yield, which depends on market. I think initially they float at 8%, but
Mhm.
depending on market dynamics, it could be trading cheaper or more expensive than that. And the yield changes exactly like the yield changes on all the other fixed income tools. So this essentially is nothing. This is, I mean, nothing new. You can find many other companies that offer corporate bonds, and they
Mhm.
simply give you yield. The yield doesn't give you anything, claim to the company. Simply yield, and you're
Right.
entitled to get your money back in case of bankruptcy and so on. And so that's okay. And then we have strike, which has some yield component and some convertibility
Mhm.
component, which will make it more volatile, and you get more exposure to Bitcoin that way. It's actually a pretty good tool for the buyer of that, because it gives you exposure to the Bitcoin's upside. And if Bitcoin does nothing, you still get your percentage yield every year. So, and you're still very senior in the capital structure. Very well. That's great. So
Mm.
people just cheer, like introduction of the strike and strife. Okay, it's good for the
I
person
mean,
who
it sounds
buys them.
reasonable, right?
What's that?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
said it sounds reasonable,
Yep.
right? I mean, in his just to explain it, or to add to it, right? The preferred shares initially, if I'm not mistaken, would only cost about. I think he would only have to pay out like $500,000 a year in dividends, right? That and then for STRK, if I'm not mistaken, and again, these are not exact numbers because I don't know what the exact share price is. I believe it's calculated on a $100 share price. If I'm not mistaken, he would have to pay out approximately $58 million a year in dividend payments just on strike.
Yeah, I haven't checked that statistic, but
I'll
the,
add this to the show notes for people if they want to go back and check this out. But yeah, that's approximately that. So these are reasonable things, right? Like considering the amount of money, like what is it? Didn't he just raise like $500 million, right, from his strike offering or his strife offering? I don't know which one exactly it was, but
I think it was strife, and
essentially
he upscaled it to 700 and
to
something.
750. Yeah, you're right. Okay. So yeah, so I mean, these numbers that he has to pay out seem like it's not so special, right?
I mean,
It
compared
does.
to the size of the company, it's an $80
E-
billion company, right? But the
exactly.
thing is, if this remains a small program, you don't care about it,
Eh,
and the yield has no negative effect. But
but
what people are really peddling is this is going to be a key feature, actually expanding the company's access to capital. We want 1% of the bond market, and so on. Okay, so if you get 1% of the fixed income market, you have to pay a lot of yield, a lot of yield on the borrowed money. And my question was, recently I posed this on Twitter, and I actually saw a bunch of other rational people bring it up. That where
mhm.
is a very simple question: where is that 8%, 10%? Where is it coming from?
Where's it coming from?
Where is it coming? And that's the killer question that simply tanked, BlockFi, Celsius, every other
Funny.
coin and every other altcoin. They are all claiming that you can just make some money off of no money. There is just some magic we can create and generate
Mhm.
some yield. Where is the yield coming from? At the end of the day, the poor, gullible common stockholder would have to be diluted further, right? They have to just print a bunch of shares and sell them, preferably when the market has a lot of hype and and the stock is trading at a premium, and use that money to generate some cash flow
Mhm.
and pay those yields. So for the person who buys a strike particularly, they have the holy grail. They have the upside, they get the
And the yield
guaranteed income, but it's coming from the common stockholders who are actually cheering for all this without really thinking about it.
that are getting diluted.
They're getting diluted. And this all works well. All works well when times are great. Like if Bitcoin is going
Yes.
perpetually up, there will be
Forever.
enough demand. There would be a lot of premium that MicroStrategy will benefit from, and that premium will turn into profits that can pay the yield, that can pay the BTC accumulation, and so on.
Mhm.
And it will all work well, except when Bitcoin takes breaks. And hell, we know Bitcoin does take breaks. So back in November, when the multiple of net asset value of MicroStrategy, this is a metric that's really important to take a look at, despite
Mhm.
all the gurus saying this is not important. This is a metric that looks at how many coins MicroStrategy has and how much more the market cap is trading at, essentially the premium, right? So
Mhm.
when it was at 3.4 and 5 in November, I put out a tweet and said, this is risky, as paraphrasing basically. I said, don't FOMO into MicroStrategy right now. And remember, in November, it had outperformed Bitcoin by something like 3x or more.
Mhm.
And people were like, this is the thing. I'm going to sell my Bitcoin and buy MicroStrategy. And I was just trying to warn people that this is not the right time to do this. And I said, don't FOMO. In fact, and then I reached this conclusion that even let's assume MicroStrategy perpetually trades at a premium to Bitcoin. The survival of MicroStrategy depends on selling shares at a premium
Mhm.
or borrowing and other stuff, but primarily selling shares. And that premium is fantastic because they are able to buy cheap Bitcoin. And what does that do? That dilutes the shareholders who paid a huge premium, and then it increases their Bitcoin stack, which means the TradFi player overpaid for Bitcoin, and that money turned into more Bitcoin, which actually helps the Bitcoin holder as well. So at that point, I reached the conclusion that in a long enough time frame,
Mhm.
you don't even need to FOMO. If MicroStrategy trade at 10x, okay, MicroStrategy will just be converting fiat into Bitcoin at 10x speed. So you don't really need to FOMO into it if it outperforms Bitcoin. Over time, it is a mechanism that turns that premium into Bitcoin. So whoever is paying the premium, it will be the loser.
Mhm.
You will be the winner. Now, you can also do some math here. Like if MicroStrategy trades at 3x to the net asset values, right? If the
Mhm.
market cap is 3 times more than a Bitcoin, that implies you have to be getting something like 12, 10%, 10-12% BTC yield, so that over a reasonable period of time, let's do the math actually. So yeah, if you get a 10% Bitcoin yield for 7 years, it will get close to 2. Essentially means initially you bought MicroStrategy at twice what's worth, given the essentially you buy Bitcoin Today, at the price of 80K, for example, you buy Bitcoin at the price of 160 because you're
Mhm.
overpaying for MicroStrategy. But the thinking is, okay, these guys will be able to accumulate more and more Bitcoin over time, and at some point, it will be um, you will get own a lot Bitcoin, a lot more Bitcoin than you initially paid for. But it takes time, and you have to assume that they'll be able to accumulate 10% year after year for 7 years. But how would they be able to accumulate 10% extra Bitcoin? By a lot more people be willing to pay a huge premium for the stock price and also lend them a lot of money. And some of it is possible. I think we still have
And
quite a
diluting the
bit of,
shares.
exactly. And
Yeah.
we still have quite a bit of energy and quite a bit of arbitrage opportunity for MicroStrategy to achieve that. But over time, this will just weaken further and further. There would be a lot more competition. There would be many more alternatives. And my thinking is, the moment you believe some financial engineering is bulletproof, and when that's a pervasive feeling, I get worried about it. And I put out that tweet,
Mhm.
and it ends up being like miraculously right at the top. And then MicroStrategy fell from there. And it's fun to remember how confident and condescending and overly sure the MicroStrategy army were when I was saying those things. Then the price tanked by 50%. And then the net asset value premium came back to 1.4 and numbers around that. And that was when I was like, okay, this is now the time. If you want to put on some calls, if you want to speculate on the rest of the bull market, this is not a bad time.
Yeah,
That also
exactly.
ended up being the local bottom. Now, I'm not dismissing, we still have a negative macroeconomic backdrop.
Yeah, yeah, we do.
There
A lot
might
of
be a
uncertainty right now, a
possibility,
lot of fear.
but it turned out to be, actually, both calls turned out to be very accurate. And that's what not drinking the Kool-Aid does. You are able to see the euphoria, and you're able to see the panic and fear.
Yeah.
So that's a general I think I monopolized the discussion quite a bit, but that's my
Smashed it.
general perspective.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so here I want to. I just want to add this to essentially to what you're saying, because I don't I don't disagree with what you're saying, and essentially, right. It's there's a lot of people trying to be right. There's a lot of people afraid to be wrong, but very few people are attempting to be accurate, and that's where I think you come in. And that is exactly the point I think you're making about understanding the euphoria, right? It's in understanding and making sure you don't get caught in that euphoria. You have a better opportunity to be accurate. Now, in the spirit of accuracy, right? Um, if we remove all of MicroStrategy, because this is my problem, okay? This is my issue with this. And again, I'm not trying to FUD this, because obviously I'm a Bitcoin hodler. So watching companies that accumulate Bitcoin collapse, that's not in my best interest, right? Like it just isn't, right? It's in my best interest to see these companies flourish and become even bigger and fight for more Bitcoin. Even if I don't want them holding Bitcoin, it doesn't matter. This is part of the way the game theory is playing out. So this is my whole issue with this, okay? Without Bitcoin, MicroStrategy essentially is down $50 million a year. Okay. Their operating expense is something like 600 million and something. Like the last numbers I think was like $612 million. Okay. So this is the issue that I have. So you have a company, right? That, to your point, Michael Saylor specifically said this was a zombie corporation, and you can see it, right? You can see it in its in its numbers, the fact that it's not actually growing its business intelligence software. Okay, so it's losing $50 million a year, but he is he's creating value by buying Bitcoin, by diluting his shareholders. Okay, we all understand this. That's totally fine. Okay. Now, right now he has a first mover advantage. Right now, for the most part, nobody can touch him, because the other people that are in this space that are doing this, I mean, Semler is far behind. Metaplanet is a fucking joke. I mean, let's be honest, right? Metaplanet is complete fucking nonsense. That's another company that is just, you know, terrible financials. But look at us, we buy Bitcoin. So there's nobody there now. Okay, the first mover advantage is fantastic, but it doesn't last forever. Okay, what happens, and this is my concern, and it's not FUD, it's real. Okay, what happens when better quality companies like the Microsofts, right? Like the eBays of the world. I don't like eBay, but they are a better quality company in terms of their earnings. Okay, the PayPals, the list can go on, right? Companies that can easily afford to pay dividends, even though I don't think PayPal doesn't actually, they don't actually pay a dividend. They're a bad example. But Microsoft, Adobe, Amazon, Google, all of these companies are significant. Meta, right? Like Facebook, like these companies have pallets of cash. Okay, so when a company like this decides to start buying Bitcoin because they understand the melting ice cube, why am I going to purchase shares of MicroStrategy, who clearly has a dying business that has like they're losing money every year, which means they have to. So unless he figures out how to become profitable in order, what I'm saying is, in order to buy Bitcoin without diluting the shareholders further, to me, the end game is obvious. In the end, I think MicroStrategy ends up in a situation where they have to sell their Bitcoin. The only way that they can't is if they are lucky enough to have favorable market conditions going forward and a cult-like following, which are the two things you outlined as well. So I just, look, I understand that people can make money off of this. I understand that they have made money off of this. I saw plenty of guys cheering how they made life-changing money with their MSTR calls and their purchases way back in like the 90s and the hundreds. That's fantastic. But I unfortunately, for me, unless MicroStrategy actually figures out how to become cash flow positive in their software business, I don't see this ending well for them. And
Let
I
me
mean,
let
look,
me tell you the
yeah,
Kool-Aid
please.
version, right?
Yeah.
If you drink the Kool-Aid version is that okay, they are number one holder of Bitcoin.
Yes.
2.5% number one corporate, 2.5% of the supply is owned by them. So they have this massive scale, and they bought it at on average, I believe, 66K. That's the average cost basis. So the new company that wants to do this probably have to start from a higher base, and the price will keep going up. Although not guaranteed, we may get a bear market that just allows this allows another company to acquire a lot more at the similar cost basis. So that's not even fully sure, but the idea is the next guy will just be able to do this a little bit less, a little bit slower, and at a little bit higher prices. Okay, so that means they can catch up to them. But and then the argument goes, because now MicroStrategy has the largest stack, this kind of gives them some advantage, a little bit of imaginary advantage. I teach economies of scale to my students all the time, and I'm still trying to figure out how does it work in Bitcoin. Like if you have many more Bitcoin, why does it make you put you in a better position to generate yield on it or not? That's a little bit vague. And I just see many people repeating it, which tells me they heard it from some source and they're just all rehearsing it. But then what will happen is MicroStrategy be able to leverage that massive stack into a Bitcoin bank. Okay. That's fine. I think if that happens and they're actually able to generate yield, I would love what's going on. Right, I would have a lot less fear because there is real value being generated on a daily basis, which helps the economy. Somebody pays for it, and that turns into investment into Bitcoin. That's fantastic. So let's see, but it hasn't happened, and we are not really hearing, evidence that it's soon. Maybe next cycle, maybe later, but not immediate. So it's not on the horizon, at least for now. So what we have, the other part of the narrative is the BTC yield. right? The idea is, okay, we will buy this thing, and over time we'll have a lot more Bitcoin, which I just said, if you pay twice the amount, the math says you have to be guaranteed, you have to be bidding on a 7% yield for 10 years for the 2x to just give you break even, to just get enough Bitcoin that you overpaid for. Well, MicroStrategy can do a lot better, but that's an assumption, and you have to be very careful. And just looking at this, again, my analysis was that a lot of the premium comes from retail hype.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And when would hype go away? When volatility goes away, when Bitcoin becomes boring, when Bitcoin stops explosive growth. Okay, so it doesn't even have to crash. The moment, my thinking was that if it even trades sideways, all that excitement, all that euphoria in retail will go away. So a lot of that premium will deflate. And some of the responses I was getting from the army of MicroStrategy was, no, MicroStrategy will generate yield, and it can now operate even independently of Bitcoin. It has the escape velocity, a bunch of jargon, complex logic. But what happened in last few months was that Bitcoin did a sideways before it actually crashes, but did a sideways for a while, and MicroStrategy during that sideways for Bitcoin crashed by 40%, 50%, and of course crashed a lot after Bitcoin crashed. So essentially, we did have an empirical validation of the idea that when Bitcoin becomes boring, a lot of that outperformance of MicroStrategy goes away, right? So you empirically see this, but then you have this imaginary future which will invalidate all the stuff that we see. Okay, I'm not dismissing it 100%, but I'm just saying you're making a huge assumption in here.
Yes.
And you're putting yourself up for pretty big surprises. Bitcoin loves to surprise you. Bitcoin loves to go do something completely against what the short-term people want. And when that happens, you're in a really bad position if you drank too much of that Kool-Aid. One other thing I want to mention: Jeff Park, head of Alpha Strategies.
Yeah.
He's been also, a very, very respectable analyst of what's going on with MicroStrategy, and he has this point, and he doesn't publicize it a lot, but I follow meticulously all this stuff in other platforms, and he's mentioning that a lot of that premium is technical. It's not fundamental. Even that yield story is not something that people are actually calculating. It's kind of sort of a soft narrative. Most of the premium for MSTR comes from the leverage products that have been around. There is MSTU, MSTX, all these tickers are 2x ETFs on the stock price. And when you buy a 2x ETF, the more investment it absorbs, they have to buy a lot of the actual stock as a backup or as a base. So all these leverage products around the stock put upward pressure on it, so it goes up further than the Bitcoin holdings would suggest. But the thing is, this works on the way downside as well. On the way down as well. So when the other way happens, money will get redeemed from these leverage products, and they have to sell a lot of the common stock to compensate. So essentially, you're getting a leveraged Bitcoin product here, except you also have the corporate risk and all the other risks here. So it's good to know this, right? Even if I have some long positions on MicroStrategy, as I said, as of last couple of weeks, very small, for the last 6-7 years, I've had one investment, but this, which was Bitcoin, fully out of TradFi, self-custody. But this year I'm also playing with some of the TradFi. I actually went back a little bit. I never thought I would go back to stocks, and it felt great. But just because now I have to be a full analyst of every aspects of the markets, I'm getting involved, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying I'm bearish at this point, or like
Mhm.
you should sell, you should buy. I don't care. You could do whatever you want. But I'm saying you have to stay rational and you have to be always ready to see both sides of an argument. And
Um,
uh, blind following of a narrative is definitely not uh, doesn't align with a rational approach.
but we're gonna be we're gonna wrap up. We are gonna wrap up
Oh,
soon,
let
though.
me mention one thing. It's very
Yes.
important, very very important. I should have said
Yes.
it early on. Another concern I have, but given all the respect that we have for MicroStrategy does, Saylor does, and all that, there is a massive negative aspect, which again the blind followers completely ignore, which is the centralization of ownership, right? We have all said this for years that ownership really doesn't matter for Bitcoin, right? So we understand that. However, Bitcoin is a social phenomenon,
Mhm.
right? So simply because I own a lot of it doesn't matter. But if I own a lot of it and I create and I convert the majority of, or a very significant, especially economic significant portion of the network to follow me, then that becomes a
Mhm.
concern, right? And what Saylor is doing, he's very specifically pushing this idea of Bitcoin is digital gold, and that sounds fantastic, except when you
Mm.
realize he means it is only digital gold and nothing further,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So any billionaire can have their own thoughts, but this is different, right? He's now kind of a cult leader, um, and there's a lot of money behind him.
And he's driving a narrative.
Is driving the narrative. He's now getting increasing ties with the state. Howard Lutnick, Secretary of
Mm.
Commerce, owns a lot of MicroStrategy, and
So does BlackRock.
he's the state, BlackRock. And then we also have a similar parallel, route that goes from Eric Trump, who just got on the board of MetaPlanet, and MetaPlanet is business partner with Bitcoin Magazine, and Bitcoin Magazine is the probably number one Bitcoin media.
Hmm.
So now we're getting states, we're getting media, we're getting holders creating this block, and that reminds me a lot of the block size wars, where miners and
Hmm.
companies and all that, they were forming this other unit and block against the common plebs. Now what that can happen, we already know that we've heard some discussion um, from people like Matt Odell that Saylor has been actually trying to block some of the funding for Bitcoin development. So he has already tried to influence the future of Bitcoin, and he will. He will do more and more, because if Bitcoin ends up presenting any risk to the state, this will directly go against Michael Saylor's interests, and he will try to kill it. So this is another risk. I'm not saying it's happening right now or immediately and so on, but I do see this aspect, which many other people don't see. So just I didn't want to finish without mentioning this.
No, I appreciate that, man. I think those are all valid points. Odell can judge Saylor all he wants, but you know what I mean. We're all humans, and as humans, we're all dualistic and hypocrites. So maybe not Odell personally, but yeah, OpenSats definitely, for whatever reason, there's some projects like Seed Signer that they choose not to help. Anyways, there are some points I wanted to make, going back to what you were talking about with the yield. Okay, so because MicroStrategy's business is losing money year over year, I'm talking about the software business. Okay, is losing money year over year. Um, that yield can only come from diluting shareholders. I don't see any other way. Now, the other way is, which is what he won't do, is sell Bitcoin. Because see, I think that this is the piece that people are pretending don't exist. So like if you're a person who lives off of your Bitcoin and your income doesn't sustain your operations, then you can either borrow money, okay, or sell your Bitcoin. That's at an individual level. So if we extrapolate that out to a public company, I don't care how fancy all the financials get. I'm way too stupid to understand that stuff. But to a company, all he can do is borrow money, i.e., dilute shareholders, or sell his Bitcoin. Or the third option, figure out how to turn that software business profitable again. Right? I just don't see any other way. So I'm not, like, I just want to stress to people that are watching this, like, we're not sitting here trying to shit on MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor and stuff like that. This isn't like a I hate this hero or something like that. What this is learning to think accurately about these types of situations, because you've got a whole lot of people in an echo chamber that have zero incentive to make you think about this or to have you think about this in a well-rounded way. Okay. The best way for all of us to think about this is like we're just blindly following the Pied Piper. Okay. That is no joke. Like that, to everybody that's selling a narrative, that's what it is. So yeah, there really is very little incentive for us to sit here and tell the truth, because you'll see the comments are just going to
And
be
you
like,
have to see the
short my
pyramid.
MSTR, like that's what you mostly see. Just short it. It's like, dude, I don't need to fucking short it to have an opinion. Okay. You're just a loser. Like,
And you
anyways.
have to see how this works. So, when you reach a place that you're now a MicroStrategy influencer, you have no other choice than to perpetually hype it up,
Yep.
because all you are is a MicroStrategy cheerleader. If you're not that, then you lose all the attention. So you have to keep going. Plus, money flow start to emerge. You will get invited to events that Saylor plans. You will get all these other sources
That's
of income
right.
that ties to your position as the MSTR cheerleader. You get all the attention from the company if you do this, right? So then it ends up being impossible for you to escape. Now you're a tool, right? So all we're trying to do here is we want to have an objective opinion, objective perspective about
Mm-hmm.
what's going on, and not really leave our decision making to the crowd and think for ourselves.
I just actually I wanted to before we end, I just had this is a great conversation, by the way. I think too many people are having the other conversation, which tells you this is all just going to the moon. But okay, here's another thought exercise. Okay, you have two companies, right? One of them is MicroStrategy. It has MicroStrategy's financials. It has the 500,000 Bitcoin from MicroStrategy. Company B is whatever other company, the exact same amount of Bitcoin, but no long-term debt, no debt at all, doesn't have to dilute shareholders, and can simply use cash flows to purchase Bitcoin. Which shares are you buying as an investor? We're not even talking
Competition
about as a
and moat.
trader.
Yeah. This is
Like,
another
it's a
another thing
no-brainer.
I always tell students is, when you're investigating an opportunity, an investment, a business, whatever, it's not about how I mean, a huge part of it is how exciting the product is, but also how formidable the competition is. How hard is it for 50 other companies to show up and start buying Bitcoin and putting it on the balance sheet? Again, the Kool-Aid
Yes.
version is, oh, no one else is going to get that big, so perpetually we will all be overpaying a premium to MicroStrategy. I just don't think that's true. There will be a lot of competition in a lot of places in the world, and that moat will not persist as long as you guys think, especially if banks come in. Banks can print money out of thin air, right? They can offer pretty fantastic yield on your Bitcoin that you hold with them. So you don't, and a bunch of other things that we haven't even thought about. So competition would be formidable. It is a temporary arbitrage, which might work very well, which is why a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people are playing it with options, because they cap the downside and allow you to benefit a lot from the upside. But uh, long term, actually, a few days ago, I put out a tweet and said, on a long term basis, I don't see how MicroStrategy will keep outperforming Bitcoin. I mean, it's kind of a short term outperformance, and then giving all that back. So again, all I want for people to to consider that there is massive amount of hype and emotion, and a lot of it is brainless. So just don't fall prey to. I've heard so many stories of people who get crushed in the recent run from 500 to 240 just because they were listening to this arrogant guy who a lot of people actually now hate on Twitter, who was saying, oh, pushing everyone to buy to over leverage and put a lot of money at risk
Mm-hmm.
with the prospects of getting rich next month. Pretty crazy. And I try to warn people, but uh, and I'm hearing so many people saying they lost massive amounts of money because of that. So don't fall prey. This happens every single time. In
Every
every
time.
cycle, you get this guy who knows how to lever up. One day they were pushing, FTX. One cycle they were pushing FTX calls. Now it's levered Bitcoin products, this and that. And of course, every time there are a few people who make a ton of money because they levered up. But then you, as a retail who listen to them and follow them, give them all the engagement, you follow them at the top after the opportunity is gone, and you get wrecked. And you are the yield.
Yep. Very well said. Indeed. Even in this case, you are the yield. Dude, thank you so much for joining me. This was a great episode. My camera wants out of here for some reason. It's okay, it keeps overheating. But Sina, one last time for the viewers and the listeners, how can people find you? Where can they find you? And we are going to put all this good stuff in the show notes.
Thanks a lot. These days, the main way to follow best of my work is through our Bitcoin intelligence platform. If you just go on 21stcapital.com/BI, very simple. Then you'll find our platform, and you can read our blog. It's going to be it's going to have always a free component. There's also paid component for people who want more detailed analysis. But what we will be doing, just what I said, we will be spending all week analyzing where money is going in the global landscape, macroeconomics, what's going on with tariffs, what's going on with government spending, how would that affect the economy, how would liquidity affect Bitcoin, and then trying to track who's doing what in the Bitcoin land through the lens of on-chain, and what's the sentiment in options and derivatives. Bring all that together in a cohesive story, and to the best of our ability, try to guide people into the status of the market. And hopefully that will make everyone better hodlers and just better Bitcoiners.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well said. Guys, this does it for this episode of Pleb Underground. Don't fall for the hype. Okay, there is no shame in living to stack another day. Okay, don't fall for that, guys.
Love
All
it.
right. Yeah, thank you so much, Sina, for joining me. Have a good one.
Have a good one.
Peace.
More toxic, what? More